all due respect, John, I was a strong supporter then of going into Iraq. I'm a strong supporter now. Everybody knows what my position is. But if we spend our time debating what happened 11 or 12 years ago, we're going to miss the threat that is growing and that we do face.
Dick Cheney's been making talk show rounds recently telling us that Obama's failing the American public by not launching into Iraq one more time to kill more people at a huge cost. This is the man who told us that the first Iraq war would be over in about 100 days. Remember that? Joining me now to tell the ugly story of Dick Cheney's warmongering is Farron Cousins, executive editor of the Trial Lawyer magazine. Farron, another Sunday of Sunday war shows. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. You have a corporate media that just is itching to get us back into Iraq because they made so damn much money off the last war. So what do? They put in people like Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, all the war pimps. I mean, Rumsfeld, you name it. The war pimps are out in full tilt, and organizations like ABC are making sure that they just let them pitch this war again. Do you see it differently?
Oh, absolutely not. And I think what's remarkable about it is that by the time all of these people left office, there was a general consensus among both conservatives and liberals that these guys lied us into a war, killed thousands of U.S. troops, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians, and they were basically the political pariahs of America. But now all of a sudden we get turmoil in Iraq, and instead of being labeled as criminals, they're labeled as experts. We bring on Dick Cheney because he's an expert in security. He's an expert in Iraq, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, let me talk about that expert just for a minute. This is the expert that made speeches all over the media, tons of speeches, where he said, A, the war is going to be a 100-day war. B, I know personally that there are weapons of mass destruction. He took it on himself to say, almost like sworn affidavit, yeah, I know that personally there are weapons of mass destruction. C, that Saddam Hussein was responsible for 9/11. So rather than the media asking any serious questions, they let this buffoon, who was nothing more than a war pimp, interestingly enough, a war pimp who has never been to war himself because he did everything he could to avoid the draft in Nam. But they just let him go. We're seeing that same thing again, aren't we?
We are. And you know what else they're letting go? A huge part of the story. You know, think back about 13 years ago to those secret energy task force meetings that Dick Cheney was holding with Halliburton, Exxon, Chevron, all the major players from the oil industry. We don't know very much about what happened in those meetings, but what we do know is that they had a map of Iraq drawn out, and each little individual spot was cut up, and they said, this part, Exxon, this is your part of Iraq. Halliburton, this is yours. Everybody had their own little piece of the Iraq pie, and nobody talked about it back then hardly ever, other than, you know, the few progressive hosts that were out there. But nobody's bringing that up today. When they get Dick Cheney on the show, say, can you take us back? Can you tell us what happened in those meetings? Which part of Iraq went to Halliburton? Which part went to Exxon? Nobody wants to ask him those tough questions, and it's very sad that one of the toughest interviews Dick Cheney has had actually came from Megyn Kelly at Fox News.
And I really wouldn't call that a tough interview at all, but you're right. She's the only one. I mean, Gregory, forget it. I mean, you know, Gregory, it sounds like he is on, you know, he's part of the team. Yeah, let's go do this again. Let's kill another 4,500 U.S. soldiers. Let's kill another 650 Iraqi civilians. Let's spend another $4 trillion because this is what this has cost us. And nobody is asking this character, who should be a war criminal, Dick Cheney, should be calibrated as a war criminal. And you know what the problem is? The sitting president, Mr. Obama, decided, hey, we're just not going to look back. Remember his speech, let's look ahead?
Right.
This issue that you're talking about, though, we know quite a lot about because our law partner actually asked for freedom of information request. He made freedom of information requests asking for that material. The U.S. Supreme Court stopped it. Actually, Scalia stopped it. He said, no, you can't have that material. And he said that 1 week after he went duck hunting with Dick Cheney. Now, why is it so important? Because this map that you're talking about, we know exists, and so Dick Cheney is continuing to deliver after he was paid $35 million from Halliburton. Don't miss that. That was just the beginning. That's only $35 million. That's just the surface. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And so, go ahead.
Well, Dick Cheney is still the oil industry's boy. He always has been, and he always will be. You know, he may not have a lot of time left on Earth, but he is damn sure going to spend that time making sure that his friends at Halliburton, who made him a multimillionaire, get their payday. Because it never really came from the first Iraq War. They went in, they made such a mess that nobody could really do anything. Yeah, they did make a lot of money off it, but not as much money as they had thought. And when Obama came in, eventually pulled troops out, as expected, the whole place kind of descended into chaos like we're seeing now. But the bigger part of that story is that we knew no matter what, no matter how long we stayed in Iraq, it was going to descend into chaos. We had every single military expert telling us even before our invasion that if you go in there, it is unsustainable. You will have to be there forever. Our torture policies helped bolster al-Qaeda. Study after study proves that. We created this mess, and now there's not much we can do.
Farron, you remember the generals when they were critical of, they said, first of all, they laughed at the idea of Dick Cheney's 100-day war. They said, how pathetically stupid. Now, those generals were discredited, but what did they say? Let's think back what they said. They said, first of all, we're not really sure there's weapons of mass destruction. They said, we know that Saddam Hussein is not connected to 9/11. They were telling the truth. The other thing that I think is most important is they said the sectarian violence is going to escalate if we do this. Sectarian violence between the Sunnis and the Shiites. And they called it exactly. They said there's no way that you're going to go in and ever leave Iraq. If you go in there, you are there forever. This is not a North Korea, South Korea kind of scenario at all. That was what they were trying to sell. Well, at least we can stabilize it. The general said impossible because you have Iran involved, you have Syria involved, you have Afghanistan involved, and you know what? The real problem is you got China involved. And so what you have is this sectarian conflict that the general said is never going to go away.
Right, and you can go back through those news stories dating all the way back to 2002 and read every single warning that they gave us. And now you compare that to what's happening today, everything they predicted came true. And it all relates back to the policies of Dick Cheney. I mean, you can't even call it the Bush presidency. It was the Dick Cheney presidency. He is the one who wanted this. He was the one involved with the Project for a New American Century. And I guess that new American century is a century of war, because that is what Cheney wants. That is what Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Jeb Bush.
Oh, yeah, the Jeb Bush story that we're going to talk about on this show. Look, the truth is, this is as much a media story. This is a media war. Don't you remember Wolf Blitzer with his big maps on the floor and holograms? We're going to move in here today, and we've got embedded journalists that they're going to tell about this glorious war, and it's going to be over with. You remember that? It was like we were selling, may as well sold popcorn with it, as if we were going to go in there and get out. Later, 4,500 dead U.S. soldiers, 45,000 crippled with brain damage, amputations, paralysis, and disabilities that changes their life forever. And you have this war pimp, this coward of a vice president, ex-vice president, Dick Cheney, talking about the glory of it. And there's no question, just because of this point that you made, there's no question, it all relates to those promises that he made to the Halliburtons and the Exxons and the Shells before the first round took place.
Well, and you go back and look at how the media is promoting it. Like, oh gosh, we've got Dick Cheney coming on our show today to talk about Iraq. You don't want to miss it. You know, they're going to social media and they're talking about it like, you got to hear what Dick Cheney's going to say. Dick Cheney's got some great insight into this. And nobody ever wants to just say like, this man lied. There are thousands of families out there who no longer have fathers or mothers or sons or daughters because of Dick Cheney.
Yeah, and let me tell you this. Dick Cheney's new talking point, you followed this one, the new Republican talking point is ignore how we lied to you last time. We have to pay attention to this. Ignore it. It doesn't mean anything. We lied to you. It was a disaster. But ignore all that because now this is more important.
that is almost exactly what he said on ABC News this week. And he said, forget what happened in Iraq before, because that doesn't matter anymore. The only thing that matters is what Obama is not doing in Iraq today. He told us to just forget about those 8 years of endless war that he wanted, where it was a complete failure.
Yeah, if we would have had some real congressional hearings on Dick Cheney's lies and Wolfowitz's lies and Judith Miller and Paul Pillar, I mean, if we'd have just had some truth here, maybe we wouldn't even be having these Sunday talk shows, having to endure Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Cheney, war pimps, talking about another war that they would never participate in. Thank you for joining me, okay?
Thank you.